What if I told you there was a motorcycle subculture that was so preposterously loud, so flamboyant, and so chaotically outrageous that it made even the most dedicated Harley pirates or daredevil stunt riders look tame? Well, today we're diving into the world of Bozozoku, one of Japan's most notorious, dramatic, and misunderstood motorcycle movements. Bozozoku isn't just about wildly modified bikes. It's about rebellion, identity, aesthetics, and the universal human instinct to push against the boundaries of a rapidly changing society. This is the story of Bozozoku, how it started, how it shaped Japan's youth culture, and how it fits into the broader global pattern of two-wheeled rebellion that all sprang up in other parts of the world, all at the exact same time in history. Today's gonna be a great episode. Let's get into it. The term Bozozoku translates to violent running tribe. Now, that sounds a little theatrical, like a performative over-exaggeration, and in many ways, it kind of was, albeit intentionally so. In the simplest sense, Bozozoku refers to groups of Japanese youth who formed riding groups and adopted wildly customized motorcycles as the centerpiece of their identity. But the culture was far more involved than just a hobby or style of dress. It was an entire universe built around aesthetics, spectacle, and rebellion. To understand Bozozoku, you need to see it not just as a motorcycle style, but an ecosystem of fashion, behavior, and ritual. And in that sense, it's much broader of an idea than something like choppers or cafe racers. While Bozozoku bikes are definitely distinct, the name encompasses far more than just the motorcycles themselves. These early riders weren't just building bikes, they were building a personal identity. The motorcycle, loud and dramatic, functioned as a symbol and a vessel for expressing individuality in a society that prized conformity and order. It is important to recognize that Bozozoku reached into music, fashion, slang, and even the way in which young people saw themselves in a broader social structure. It mixed American rock and roll, Japanese delinquent archetypes, biker mythology, and post-war restlessness into something uniquely Japanese but globally resonant. To understand where Bozozoku came from, you have to imagine Japan in the years following World War II. The country had been devastated, both physically and psychologically, and yet the post-war years brought an era of explosive economic growth and rapid modernization. Japan rebuilt itself at a breakneck pace, transforming from a war-torn nation into an industrial powerhouse. But that transformation came with an enormous pressure. Japanese society placed immense emphasis on discipline, education, work ethic, and social conformity. There were strict expectations around behavior, achievement, and how one should fit into the larger collective. For young people, especially young men, this was both stifling and alienating. Many felt caught between the expectations of traditional Japanese culture and the new hyper-modern society that was emerging around them. Returning World War II soldiers specifically felt lost after the war, struggling to readapt to civilian life in a new cultural landscape. Many future Bozozoku riders were at one point actually kamikaze pilots. They were young, fearless thrill seekers who were literally willing to give their lives to defend their country. Then, when the war ended, surviving kamikaze pilots were just expected to return to normalcy with no outlet for the extreme risk-taking and fanaticism that had become a core fixture of their identity during the war. So upon returning, motorcycles offered something that the rest of their lives just didn't. Excitement, freedom, risk, and a sense of belonging that wasn't mediated by formal education, corporations, or really rigid Japanese social hierarchies. At the same time, American culture was flooding into Japan. US soldiers brought rock and roll records, greaser fashion, and outlaw biker mythology with them during the post-war occupation. Japanese youth eagerly absorbed this imagery, but they didn't simply copy it. They reinterpreted it. They kind of remixed it. Rockabilly became rockabiri, a distinctly Japanese interpretation that birthed an entire subculture in and of itself. American outlaw biker culture melded with rock music and fused with restless youths who were primed to adopt the style that looked familiar but was entirely its own. Bozozoku was in many ways the Japanese expression of that same rebellious spark that had ignited youth motorcycle culture around the world at the same time. It was a convergence of post-war disillusionment, American cultural influence, plentiful affordable motorcycles, and a generational hunger for something raw, chaotic, and, well, kind of liberating. So of course we have to talk about the bikes themselves. Bozozoku motorcycles are some of the most visually recognizable machines in motorcycle history, probably more so than any other type of custom style that has come before or since, maybe rivaled only by insane custom Hayabusas. Maybe. Bozozoku bikes are not built for practicality or even performance, they're built for spectacle. Take a look at one of these bikes and you'll know exactly what I mean. The tall fairings that look like someone stretched a cafe racer into some Dadaist sculpture, exhaust pipes that are erected up into the sky, and paint jobs that rival some of the most extreme chopper builds I've ever seen. The bikes usually began life as affordable middleweight Japanese UJM machines. Many of the early Bozozoku groups used machines like the Honda CB400T or Kawasaki's Z-Series, Suzuki GS's, or Yamaha XJs. These motorcycles were everywhere in Japan. They were easy to work on, they were reliable enough to survive mechanical abuse, and cheap enough for young people to buy and customize. But what really defined Bozozoku was what these young riders did to the motorcycles. They transformed ordinary cheap bikes into rolling declarations of identity. The fairings were lengthened and pitched upwards until they towered above the handlebars. The seats were extended into impossibly tall backrests. Paint jobs became loud, metallic, and glittery. Exhausts were customized not for performance but for noise, because these bikes weren't about speed, they were about making their presence known. And exhaust noise is a key part of Bozozoku. Riders would gather and rev their engines in super specific rhythmic patterns, blipping the throttle as if they're singing a song or telling a story. With big groups of riders all thundering through the city with their super ostentatious machines, Bozozoku is less a motorsport and more of a mobile street art performance. When you look closely, you realize that Bozozoku fashion is just as important as the motorcycles themselves. Riders often wear uniforms called tokufuku, which are long military-style coats or jumpsuits decorated with hand-painted or embroidered kanji, military imagery, or personal messages. So these garments created a sense of unity and theatricality, turning a Bozozoku parade into something that felt sort of half biker gang, half rock band, and military procession. These uniforms were usually paired with tall boots, aviator glasses or goggles, white gloves, and hachimkai headbands tied across the forehead in a style reminiscent of both martial tradition and youthful defiance. Many riders wore their hair in extravagant styles as well, a rockabilly pompadour or dyed with bleach in a way that stood out sharply against the conventional norms of Japanese grooming standards. The Bozozoku aesthetic didn't stay confined to the motorcycle community though. Over time, elements of Bozozoku style seeped into mainstream Japanese fashion. You can see it echoed in Harajuku streetwear, in punk and Yankee styles of the 80s and 90s, and in countless manga and anime characters who embody the delinquent archetype. Much like how in America, the Shot Perfecto leather jacket began as a garment for outlaw bikers and eventually became a fashion staple worldwide. Bozozoku fashion contributed to a distinctly Japanese visual language around rebellion. The clothes weren't simply outfits, they were uniforms, symbol of belonging in a world where young people felt like they didn't really belong anywhere else. If you've been thinking about becoming a member on yamanoob.co, now is the best time to do it. We've started new Discord-only micro giveaways. Every other week, I'm gonna be giving away to someone on Discord some tires, gloves, helmets, jackets, boots, anything I can think of that would help them on their motorcycle ride. If you're interested in winning consistent fun prizes, head over to yamanoob.co and become a member today. Of course, the best prize of all is winning a giveaway motorcycle. December 26th is the very last day you have to get in to win this bike. So head over to the website, become a member, and join and have some fun on the server. Now let's get back to the show. One of the trickiest aspects to understanding Bozozoku, and something I've waited until this far into the video to discuss, is determining whether these groups were motorcycle clubs, violent street gangs, or maybe something in between. The answer is complicated because Bosozoku evolved over decades and different groups operated in different ways. In the early years, they were primarily informal riding groups, collections of friends who used motorcycles as an outlet in post-war Japan. But as the culture grew, Bosozoku groups became more and more hierarchical and more territorial. Some engaged in criminal activity, while others remained closer to a social club centered around style, camaraderie, and making a statement with their group rides. Now, despite the popular image, Bosozoku organizations were typically independent rather than branches of a single national club. Most groups were local, and their rituals reflected a blend of Japanese delinquent culture and the loose organizational patterns borrowed from Western biker clubs. Leadership structures emerged, with senior members overseeing younger recruits and specific roles designated to riders to maintain cohesion in the group's cacophonic parades. Over time, Bosozoku activity caught the attention of law enforcement. Shocker! The large group rides, the loud nighttime gatherings, the confrontational attitudes, and occasional fights made them a public nuisance. In the 80s and 90s, Japan enacted several laws aimed directly at curbing Bosozoku activity, imposing penalties on group riding, and restricting vehicle modifications, and cracking down on the display of gang insignia. Should come as no surprise that the Japanese value cultural and social order, right? Police began targeting Bosozoku organizations specifically, using specialized anti-Bosozoku units. The result was a dramatic decline in membership. And by the 2000s, the culture had shrunk significantly to less than 10,000 members, down from the more than 40,000 that existed during its peak in the 80s. Now in 2025, there are supposedly less than 50 official members, though the style of bike itself remains among enthusiasts as an homage to Japan's most notorious era of motorcycling. Despite a decline in official membership, the idea of Bosozoku remains embedded in Japanese pop culture. One of the most fascinating parts of studying Bosozoku is realizing that their story doesn't exist in a vacuum. Across the world, at the same exact moment in history, other societies were producing their own motorcycle subcultures driven by almost identical forces. In the US, for example, returning World War II veterans found themselves adrift between the adrenaline-fueled chaos of wartime and the polite domesticity of the 1950s suburbia. Many of them bought cheap military surplus motorcycles, formed clubs, and sought out freedom, excitement, and brotherhood that they just couldn't find in quiet civilian life. This eventually gave rise to early American motorcycle clubs like the Booze Fighters and the Hells Angels. And various sensationalized events like the Hollister riots or unsavory depictions in the media shaped the cultural perception of motorcycles in the United States. The parallels with Bosozoku is just uncanny. Both cultures formed around young men searching for identity in a world that had changed too quickly. Both cultures borrowed from rock and roll, military symbolism, and anti-authoritarian attitudes. Both became focal points for public anxiety, representing a broader fear of youth rebellion. And both developed styles of customized motorcycles that prioritized individuality. The same thing happened in Britain, where the Ton-Up Boys built lightweight cafe racers designed for speed, adopted the greaser aesthetic, and congregated around cafes as a symbol of their independence. The cafe racer, which was designed for sprinting between hangouts, was the UK's counterpart to the Bosozoku style. If you zoom out even further, post-war motorcycle subcultures appeared around the globe for the same reasons: economic shifts, returning veterans, rapid modernization, and a universal desire among the youth to carve out an identity separate from the expectations of society. Bosozoku were unique in their aesthetic, but not in their origins. And it's pretty amazing this all happened without all being connected by the internet. It's pretty cool. So was Bosozoku important to motorcycle culture as a whole? I guess that depends. On the one hand, Bosozoku played a massive role in shaping the style, tone, and mythology of Japanese motorcycling. Their customizations influenced multiple generations of Japanese bike builders. Their fashion informed entire streetwear movements, and their imagery fueled decades of manga, anime, and Japanese pop culture. Their presence kept motorcycles firmly embedded in youth culture. But on the other hand, Bosozoku also contributed to the stereotype that motorcycles were just inherently connected to delinquency and misbehavior. Their activities led to stricter laws on motorcycle modification and group riding, making it harder for all riders. And their brashness may have slowed the mainstream acceptance of motorcycles in Japan, just like American biker clubs did in the US. But don't worry, Honda would eventually make it all right again. But there is a deeper, more philosophical layer to this question too. If Bozozoku did create friction with the public, they preserved the edge that modern motorcycling often lacks. Safety is at the forefront of motorcycling today. Electronic rider aids, catalytic converters, airbag vests, and look, I recognize that the advancements in safety have yielded a net positive on the sport. But the romantic in me can't help but think motorcycling has lost some of what it once was. Motorcycling's more regulated these days, it's more corporate, and the culture can sometimes feel a little sterile and homogenized. Bozozoku reminds us that motorcycles used to be unapologetic, raw, and a direct opposition to conformity. Motorcycling doesn't need the lawlessness or the chaos of Bozozoku, but it could benefit from remembering the spirit. Bozozoku culture is one of those topics that seems simple on the surface, but becomes infinitely richer the more you dig in. It's a story about motorcycles, yeah, but it's also a story about the rebellion of youth, generational conflict, and the universal human longing for belonging. Understanding Bozozoku helps us understand not just Japan, but understand how motorcycles captured a moment in time and shaped the culture for decades. And hey, say what you will about bikes, but these things really do shape culture. I appreciate you sticking around all the way to the end. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.